Welcome to Summer Fits, the show where you always opt in for $47 million. That's Danny Chau.
That's Justin Verrier.
Hello! It looks like the Thunder need to get rid of Westbrook. Where is he going to go? That's what we're going to talk about today. Let's first open up the books here just to get a sense of where we are here. Russell Westbrook makes a ton of money, Danny.
Supermax.
Super money.
5-year, $206.8 million.
Yep.
That is a staggering amount of money.
And though he's already played one season on that deal, still a ton of money left. 4 years, $171.1 million left, though one of the last years is a player option,
Sure.
Although it's for $47 million. I don't know where he's gonna make that up otherwise. The one saving grace here, there is no trade clause in this deal, which means that they can trade him anywhere they want.
Right.
Which helps, although it seems like they're kind of intent on helping out Russ.
Yeah, he's kind of the final franchise cornerstone who has actually expressed loyalty to the team. Right. So he has stuck it out through his entire 11-year career. I think the Thunder, being one of the newest franchises in the NBA, being a franchise that has always kind of supported its superstars. Remember the stories about Kevin Durant getting Skittles, from his neighborhood all the time. Right. I think they do want to, make good.
Yeah, in Russ's defense, he did stay there. I mean, it was for an outrageous sum of money, but when Kevin Durant left, when James Harden got traded, Russ was the guy. And it seemed like up until this trade demand from Paul George, it just came out of nowhere. He was ready to go forward with what they had, even though it clearly didn't work all that well in the playoffs last season. The only other thing to mention on their books here, they have a lot of bad deals, because this is a team that had really forced the situation in order to try to open up this window around Westbrook. They were in crazy luxury tax concerns. They were last year as well.
And around draft time, that was around the time when reports started coming in. Oh, they're trying to offload a lot of these contracts to kind of dip under the luxury tax. Steven Adams was the biggest name that was brought up. Evidently, Paul George was on the table, just no one knew.
Right.
So, yeah.
Dennis Schroeder also 2 years, $31 million. Andre Roberson is still there for about $11 million. Patrick Patterson was a total dud there. Well, let's talk briefly. I think everyone at this point should know kind of where everybody stands on Russell Westbrook, the good and the bad. But basically, what are teams getting at this point?
Yeah, I think that's the kind of interesting question here, right? Russell Westbrook is exactly who you remember him being. He is a player on an enormous contract who has only really shown the ability to play one way. But the thing is, that one way still helps you win basketball games.
Sure.
The Thunder have been in the playoff hunt for the past 3 years. They haven't done much in the playoffs to show for it, but you're still getting a guy who can change the course of a game just by how hard he plays.
Yeah, he probably should be a little bit upset that this trade demand comes at this point, because he is kind of at a crossroad in his career, independent of everything that's happening here, where it seemed like in the playoffs, Damian Lillard showed him what a point guard does in the NBA now, and it's hit deep threes in addition to kind of create for other players. Now, Russ does have the body and the physicality to be a decent defensive player. He just has never been all that engaged.
Right. And even on the offensive end, when the ball isn't in his hands, we've seen countless clips of him just kind of standing out on the perimeter, not really doing anything off ball, just kind of waiting for plays to develop or waiting for the ball to get back into his hands. He's always going to be a guy who commands the ball. He's always going to be a guy who tries to dictate the game with the ball in his hands. That's just the player he is. And that's kind of where it gets tricky for a lot of these teams. And you start looking at these teams who are building around a modern system, who are building around multiple ball handlers, who are building around, three-point shooting. Does Russ make a lot of sense for a lot of these teams? Not on paper, but sometimes for, a team that's on the brink, on the cusp of contention or playoff, aspirations, you kind of have to make that leap of faith.
Yeah, and as you mentioned there, he's not going to help you much from the three-point. He's not going to help you stretch the floor at all.
Right.
He shot 29% from three last year. He's still taking them at volume. So essentially what you have is Ben Simmons level three-point shooter, but someone who's taking all those bad shots.
Right. The difference between him and Ben Simmons is just that he attempts those shots. I think the mere fact that Russell Westbrook is that kind of end-to-end, coast-to-coast type player like Ben Simmons is, but that he takes those three-pointers, he takes those pull-up jumpers, it changes the way that defenses have to play it. You have to at least guard him from that, distance out. You at least have to account for him suddenly pulling up, him suddenly making a play out on the perimeter. which you don't really have to do for Ben Simmons. I think there's still some utility in him taking those shots, even if he's not making them.
Yeah, he's still 30 years old, so he's not super old, but he has a lot of injuries on those legs.
A lot of knick-knack knee surgery type deals. I feel like he has a scope every year or so before training camp.
So some value is there. It really depends on which team can kind of unlock that. I think he is kind of in an eye of the beholder sort of situation here. I still am hopeful that if he gets in the right situation where he could just put his head down and create things for others, I think there's still an opportunity for him to be a pretty good player, just never living up to that contract, which is the issue. So we broke these teams down by tiers, kind of which teams are most likely to be interested, which teams are most likely to be able to put together the trade package for Russell Westbrook, because that money is really tough to match, especially at this point in the summer when a lot of teams' cap books are tied up in free agency deals that they literally just signed, and a lot of those deals can't really be moved until December, in some cases sometimes in January. We have the hard nose here, mostly just contenders. Danny, if you find any of these particularly interesting, stop me along the way, but the hard nose, pretty much all the teams that you expect to compete for a title, even the Warriors are, I mean, they're up against the hard cap, and I don't think they need another point guard.
I'm trying to envision a team in which Kyrie Irving, Russell Westbrook, and Kevin Durant all exist in the same team. That would be fascinating, but yeah, that's a hard no.
It's good for the blogs. The no's here, just teams that are kind of either rebuilding or they don't really need it. They already have an established point guard. The Celtics, for instance, just brought in Kemba. The Pelicans, no. I mean, the Sixers, in an alternate universe where you just swap Ben Simmons and Russell Westbrook, I'd kind of think that would be pretty interesting, actually. It wouldn't work for the math because you had to find some way to make the balance there.
Yeah, and with the Raptors, look, they had an opportunity to obtain Russell Westbrook along with Paul George for an obscene amount of talent and picks and pick swaps. They had their chance. They said no. I can't imagine things changing now.
Right. Why ruin a good thing? A few teams, again, are in that really nice zone of they're young, but they're not elite contenders yet, but they have those guys at point guard, DeJounte Murray. Well, maybe not the Bucks. The Bucks, I just don't know who they would go out and trade for.
Yeah, I mean, you would hope to kind of, I guess, center a deal around Eric Bledsoe's contract, but even then, it's not enough.
Right, he just signed that.
He just signed it, and it's, honestly, I don't think they have enough contracts that would work within the frame of time that they need it to pull off a good trade. Even though, look, Russ and Giannis together is some fantasy basketball fever dream lunacy.
Yeah, I mean, Russ, if you really want to like squint hard at it, is kind of just like a squished Giannis, you know? You just took Giannis and you're like, eh.
Yeah, remember when we called Eric Bledsoe mini LeBron?
Right, that was the thing that happened.
So we're getting a true mini Giannis.
So actually, Bledsoe has to stay there in order to make this whole weird collection of LeBronies work.
I mean, the Nuggets would have been really interesting.
Nuggets are still really interesting, but you would think that if they wanted Russ that bad, they wouldn't have just picked off Jeremy Grant and then gone about their ways here. They're also up against, I think, the luxury tax. It doesn't seem like they're the type of team that wants to pay that, even though they've said that they will, but they have shown no evidence that they will. So, sorry about that. Desperate enough to consider. These are just the teams that, man, I don't know what to do with any of
the
these
league
teams.
slots them. It's just like, who knows? I mean, the Cavs certainly have the contracts to do it. Tristan Thompson, Brandon Knight, J.R. Smith, all of these guys are pretty much on expirings, making boatloads of money. You can even toss in, Colin Sexton to sweeten the deal if that has any appeal to the Thunder. They are one of the teams that actually has, the players to actually pull off a trade and have it be kind of like a one-to-one in terms of the financials.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the Cavs are doing. I mean, they seem like they're going to go long-term rebuild, but it's going to take a while for those deals to get off their books. And Kevin Love, if there's any player that Russ might want to play his second half of his career with, or not even the second half, probably the back quarter of his career with, it's the guy he played with at UCLA. So that would make some sense.
Go Bruins.
Go Bruins, sure. All right, now the 5 teams that we have identified, based on some reporting too, from not our own reporting, but actual reporters.
I wish.
About who might have the right sort of interests and assets, and they're in the right sort of phase of contention for Russ. This is 5 rows diversion, Christian Wood. We're going to start with the Chicago Bulls. Danny.
I really like this fit for Russ. I think what the Bulls have built right now is a very young team that kind of has an identity. Everyone on that team top down, at least in the starting lineup, can shoot. And that's something that Russ has just missed for the past 3-4 years of his career. You know, it could be pretty easy to build a package around Zach LaVine and Cristiano Felicio's like bloated contract. The one thing about the Bulls rebuild right now is that it's going a little too well. And I think the Bulls fans, like the Bulls fan contingent, is waiting for the other shoe to drop. I think this might be the kind of accelerating the rebuild that we've become accustomed to with the Bulls.
Yeah, I mean, they've done a lot of good moves here. I thought going out and getting Otto Porter as opposed to trying to just hope that someone would take your cap space.
Sure.
And just bringing him in mid-season. Now he's like the perfect guy to fit around all of their good young bigs, but they're just weird fits. But now all of a sudden, you know, it makes sense for Wendell Carter to play with Otto Porter in like a smaller backcourt, or for Lauri Markkanen and Otto Porter and perhaps Wendell Carter to play all together. It's like it all kind of works together, and I'm excited to see it all play out. But as we've seen in recent years, the Bulls are just kind of willing to throw it all in the trash can and sign a Dwayne Wade.
Dwayne Wade, Rajon Rondo, that completely blew up in their faces. But yeah, like the Bulls as presently constructed right now is the perfect team to, you know, field passes from the best, you know, drive and kick player in the NBA. Mm-hmm. I think it makes total sense, and it's, you know, a market that's big enough for Russ, who is Team Jordan, right?
Yep.
Home headquarters.
Perfect.
You know? There it is.
Just perfect. All right, we're gonna go now to more of a, I guess this is a curveball, although it's picking up momentum in terms of just like fit, and people are just putting 1 and 2 together. The Minnesota Timberwolves. Really interesting one here because clearly Karl Anthony Towns is ready to take a leap. So after the All-Star break last year, which was 20 games, he averaged 28 points, 13 rebounds, 3.8 assists, with a 53, 43, 81 shooting line. That's basically MVP level stuff. The problem is he just doesn't have that other guy there. Andrew Wiggins was supposed to be that guy. Not good. I don't know if you guys have heard this before, but so they just need someone there, and I feel like what they've done over the offseason, getting these like switchy, defensive-minded wings who maybe aren't good shooters,
right?
But at the very least, like
they're
it all
cogs in
kind
the
of
machine.
Yeah, and if you just have Russ barreling down into lane and just kicking out, and with Towns there to kind of balance it off, maybe he has more open threes, Russ does. Maybe some of these other guys have more open threes because you have to double team Towns. I think it makes a lot of sense. I think it makes a lot of sense defensively too. Yep. So this is one we're super interested in. And here's the interesting question with all these trades that we're going to get into. What do the Thunder actually really get from Russell Westbrook trade package? Are they just looking for deals that are shorter in order to get all the money long term with Russ? Are they going to be able to procure like a first-round draft pick, or are they going to be able to get a younger guy in there? If you're going to do a package, if you just want to clear books, Jeff Teague and Gorgui Dieng works. Teague is an expiring contract. Gorgui Dieng has 2 years left on his deal. The other interesting one is one you brought up, Andrew Wiggins and Gorgui Dieng.
Wiggins is just the Thunder's ideal like draft prospect incarnate. Right. Like he is one of the best athletes in the NBA. A completely unproven shooter still after how many years in the league? 5 years in the league now. A guy who has untapped potential, but we don't really know how that really gets unlocked. He seems perfect for them.
I think I'd be interested to see Andrew Wiggins just try something.
Right.
And the next phase of his career. I think SGA is a good mix with him as well, because SGA just won't take shots. So he will just get out of his way and do all the other things that Andrew Wiggins hasn't shown he's been willing to do. I think it's interesting. You have new Stephon Marbury basically on your hands. New Stephon and KG, let's get it going here.
Yeah, and actually have it work and stay and, Shout out to Ryan Saunders.
All right, let's go to a team now that's been in the reporting mix here based on some news from ESPN. It seems like the Rockets are interested, because they're always interested in star players as soon as they show any interest in leaving their current team. The Houston Rockets, Danny, what would make sense for them?
Hold on, I just need to like decompress a little. I think if you were to ask me 5 years ago, 6 years ago, what my dream pairing player and coach would be, I think it would have been Russell Westbrook and Mike D'Antoni.
Sure.
So it's coming a little late.
Yeah.
I understand that, but just I want to bask in that glow of knowing the point guard master gets to have like one of the most like idiosyncratic point guards in NBA history on his team. The fit doesn't make any sense to me.
Sure, and Mike D'Antoni might not even make it to the point where Russell Westbrook is on the actual roster, but it's an interesting one.
Yeah, I mean, it's been 7 years since Russ and Harden were on the same team together. And back then, you know, they played a lot together. They played a lot with KD. Harden was a guy who, when Russ was off the floor, he would take over point guard duties completely. And he did it with complete competence. But he was also a very, very good spot-up shooter.
Right.
He can still do those things. The thing with Russ is that he hasn't really changed. And so you're asking Russ to kind of fit into this team, and I just don't really know what that means. It just means he's going to be Russ. And Harden has the tools to be a guy who can play off Russ, but is that really what you want?
Yeah, it seems like in some ways Russ is an upgrade on Chris Paul, if only because he's just younger and presumably will be healthier, although we did mention some of those knee concerns. Otherwise, though, he can't swing off the ball, which is, as we saw last season, Chris Paul did a lot of.
Right.
And just kind of watch Harden do his thing.
Yeah, and the whole thing with Paul is that he is a career excellent three-point shooter. Yeah. And like there was always the hope that, oh, you know, if he couldn't just be Chris Paul of old, then he could at least spot up. With Russ, you're basically asking him to do what Harden was asking Chris Paul to do, allegedly, where he was just like, can you just beat your man? Mm-hmm. Russ can beat his man. It's just more a question of, can he consistently knock down that shot? And if he can't, what are you really getting out of this Westbrook and Harden partnership other than maybe staggering them and possibly getting, you know, the best of both worlds? But down in crunch time, how do you really reconcile that?
I guess they would get along, in theory, better than Chris Paul and James Harden seem to at this point, based on everything we've heard this offseason. But I think there is probably a world in which like a Russ, Chris Paul, James Harden thing has to exist, because I don't know if the Thunder would be willing to take back Chris Paul's contract.
Right.
But in an ideal situation, you'd probably want to get rid of Paul too.
Yeah. So I feel like all the trade machines that I've put this through,
there are several.
There is a universe in which the Thunder and Rockets could just swap their point guards and centers. So like Chris Paul, Clint Capella for Steven Adams and Russell Westbrook. Basically what that means for the Thunder is they're just taking back less years.
Yeah.
And for the Rockets, obviously, you're taking Adams in order to get the crown jewel of the trade.
I don't hate it.
I don't hate it. I just don't think that's eventually what's going to happen. I think if there is going to be a Thunder Rockets trade, it would have to involve a third team.
Yeah.
Chris Paul would definitely have to be shipped somewhere. He would be happy.
Yeah.
I would assume.
Although you can always go home, and Chris Paul started his career in Oklahoma City.
Players Association president, man. You can't have him stranded in Oklahoma City.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's an interesting one for the Rockets. I don't think it makes sense necessarily for the Thunder. All right, let's go to the Miami Heat, the other one that's picking up, dare I say, steam. Because they are a team that now seems to think of itself as a contender. They just signed Jimmy Butler, not a player that I particularly love, not a player that, I don't actually know how you feel about Jimmy Butler.
He's fine.
Yeah, he's fine. But it does seem like they want to take a next leap here. Pat Riley's not getting any younger, and they're in the mix here according to ESPN. Do you think it makes sense?
I mean, I think it makes sense in that, yeah, you have to kind of, if you're being realist or if you're being true to yourself and you're like, hey, we are a star's destination and we just got Jimmy Butler, you kind of have to owe it to Jimmy Butler to try to get another star by his side.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
So by getting Russell Westbrook, you're basically doubling down on the Jimmy Butler formula.
Although I will say, if you're Jimmy Butler, and you left the Sixers, a team full of good, young potential stars, and you kind of wanted your own shop down in Miami, is the first thing you really want is Russell Westbrook coming in and instantly becoming like the guy there?
I feel like what Butler cares about most, and I don't know Butler at all. I've talked to him once.
That's what he says. That's what he tells you guys.
But look, it sounds like he's a guy who wants other MFers on his team.
Yeah.
He wants dudes who actually care about, you know, busting their ass and playing really hard and putting in the work. And Russell Westbrook completely checks all of those boxes. Do I see a potential fit there? Culture-wise, I do, just because these two guys basically share the same brain. They're wired the same way. They both kind of play similar styles. They're very battering ram type players. One is 6'3", the other is 6'7". So you're getting a lot of like duplication there. It could have shades of Butler and Wade if Wade were a few years younger.
Sure. Butler definitely sees himself as a Wade, so that would make some sense here. So who would they have to move in order to make it work?
I mean, the thing about Miami is that none of their players are overly attractive, but they do have plenty of contracts that fit a direct transaction with the Thunder. So you can trade Goran Dragic's expiring contract if that's what the Thunder want. If they want Justice Winslow, they can get him. I think ultimately it comes down to you're probably going to be packaging either Kelly Olynyk's or James Johnson is another guy who's making 15 to 17 mil. Another guy you can toss in, and they have plenty of first rounders.
Those deals that they signed, which were terrible and remain terrible, they've kind of come full circle now because they're starting to reach the end of it, and all of a sudden they're just money holds in order to make other deals work.
I mean, in the Supermax era, like, it's not enough that you just have a bunch of cheap contracts. If you want to take it to the next level, you kind of need tradable assets.
Yeah. So who do we have left here? We have Russ, you have Jimmy, maybe Olynyk or James Johnson, potentially Justice Winslow.
Sure.
Our guy Derek Jones Jr. And bam, that's not a terrible team. The best part about this though is Dion Waiters, still in Miami.
Still there.
Ready to rejoin the warm embrace of one Russell Westbrook. You can always go home, my friends. That is
Give me the ball.
Okay.
Give me the ball.
Okay, we're gonna end it here with the team that you might have noticed we haven't talked about yet. That's the New York Knicks. Now the Knicks fall into the same kind of zone as most of these other teams where because they signed so many free agent deals this offseason, they can't really do anything until they become tradable by league bylaws. That's December 15th. But the good thing is, just like some of the Heat deals, put them together and you make the money match. In order to get a guy like Russ in there, you could do Bobby Portis, you could do Taj Gibson, Elfrid Payton, you could throw in there. Basically just 3 of these guys that they signed for shits and giggles essentially this offseason in order to just make it seem like they actually have a functional team.
And all 3 guys have team options on the second year.
So they are tradable deals. I think a lot of teams will be interested in because of that. Now the question is,
why do they do that?
Why would the Knicks do that? It seems like they finally have shown some prudence, although it was kind of foisted upon them.
Sure.
It's not like they decided not to sign Kevin Durant, although maybe if you ask James Dolan, it'd be a little bit of a different answer. But I think the one thing you have to consider here is a lot of guys have moved this offseason. But unlike in years past, they've signed longer term deals. So Kawhi Leonard on a 4-year deal. Paul George, I think, is on a 2+1 at this point. Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, both signed long-term deals in order to go to Brooklyn. So I don't know where the next movement is going to come from, and it does feel like there's a little bit of a gap between the guys who we're used to seeing at the forefront of the league, the guys like Kawhi, the guys like Anthony Davis, and the next wave of guys, the Karl Towns, the D'Angelo Russells, those sorts of guys. Towns is just starting his max extension next season, so there's going to be a little bit of a gap here, and next year's free agent class is just bad.
Right.
It's just there's nobody out there. So if they want to really get someone and have an identity, now would kind of be the time to strike for Russ. And if you're not giving anything up, it makes some sense because as we've seen with Paul George up until this summer, Russ is a good recruiter.
Sure.
Guys like playing with Russ.
Apparently.
Even though Zach Cram wrote on The Ringer that like the effect of guys leaving the Thunder is that they often get better, everyone has really nice things to say about playing with Russ. It just seems like he's a cool guy.
And also, maybe that applies to Russ.
Yeah.
Maybe he just gets way better at everything.
He's a connector.
Yeah. And we were talking about the potential of Russ and Giannis in the Bucks. Maybe Russ and Giannis on the Knicks.
Yeah, there you go.
In 2021.
That's what Knicks fans will at least be telling themselves. So we might as well as well. All right, we're gonna end it here by just kind of going over which team we think would be the best among these. Danny, which one would you pick if you had your druthers? If you're Russ and you want to force your way to one of these teams?
Okay, if I just wanted to get the purest Russ experience, I would say Chicago.
Sure.
But if I were taking into account his desires, his clear need to be on a contender, I think putting him on the Timberwolves would make them a very, very interesting team out west. I would go with the Timberwolves.
I think the Wolves are the most fascinating fit. I just don't see Russ going into winter In Minnesota, you also have to wonder about that organization there. I mean, they've made some better moves getting an actual front office there, but I don't know if there's the stability perhaps he's looking for.
Oh God, I think I know where you're going with this.
What do you think?
The Knicks?
No, I do think there is something to it. I think like in some ways what the good that Russ does is underrated.
Sure.
Now he makes way too much money for what he actually does well, but I think there is still a good player in there somewhere. I think most likely what's going to happen is the Heat.
Okay.
I think that's a nice middle ground between you get a big market, you get to play on a big stage, you get to play with Butler, that's a star who, as you mentioned, kind of fits his persona. I don't know, it just seems like he's a Heat culture guy. Maybe he'll get shredded up with abs as well, as most people do when they go to Miami. That's their main selling point.
Right, but in your heart of hearts.
Yeah. It's the Knicks. Yeah, I want to see him on the Knicks. Let's get him on the Knicks. All right, that's it for us. We'll be back talking about all the other free agency, bonanza, fallout, if there is any still left to do here. So we will catch you next time. Thank you for watching this Ringer YouTube exclusive. Make sure you click the like button. Make sure you subscribe. Make sure you get into Danny's Twitter DMs and email him. I hear you guys have been emailing him. Keep doing that. If you want his email, just let me know.